Reefer makes darkies think they're as good as white men. There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the United States. Most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz and swing, result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others. The primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effect on the degenerate races. These statements were made by Harry Anslinger, the original head of the Bureau of Narcotics, in a hearing before the United States Senate in 1937. These quotes represent an entire era of racism and yellow propaganda that instated marijuana prohibition. I'd like to prove to you today that marijuana prohibition has failed and its continued support, or its continued practice hurts the economy. I'm going to prove this to you through 3 points. First, I'd like to talk about the ineffectiveness of marijuana prohibition and how its usage has still steadily increased. Secondly, marijuana prohibition wastes the public's resources. And finally, marijuana could generate, and lastly, marijuana prohibition causes the economy to lose money. There's not been any hard evidence on the actual amount of marijuana smokers in 1937, but as previously quoted by Harry Anslinger, he estimated about 100,000 at that time. It wasn't until 1990 that the U.S. government started doing national surveys of drug use. But in 1992, according to the annual National Survey of Drug Use and Health, a purported 17.4 million people used marijuana. In 1998, the United Nations General Assembly committed member countries to a drug-free world and to either eliminate or greatly reduce the production and usage of cannabis by 2008. In this same year, marijuana usage had spread to 19.4 million, up 10% from 1992. And by 2005, the usage of marijuana had spread to 25.4 million people, up 30% from when the UN made this commitment to end or greatly reduce its production. It's also up a whopping 46% from 1992. As you can see, regardless from the government's continued aggressive stance on the war on marijuana, the raw usage has continued to increase. Since the goal of prohibition in this context has been to either greatly lessen or eventually eliminate the usage of the drug, in that respect, we can say that it has not succeeded. Marijuana prohibition wastes the public's resources. According to the FBI's annual crime report, 47.5% of all drug arrests in 2007 were due to marijuana. That's 873,000 arrests. That's an 28% increase from 1998 and a 167% increase from 1992. As the usage of marijuana has spread, so has the arrests. According to the Office of National Drug Control Policy, 9.3% of the entire prison inmate population is being held on a marijuana-only offense. Legal drugs such as tobacco, alcohol, and prescription drugs killed over 830,000 people in the year 2000. Marijuana, on the other hand, has never been clearly linked to any case of death. If legalized, the police would run much more efficiently, eliminating much paperwork and keeping our streets safer by having more time to patrol for serious offenses that actually affect the public safety. Marijuana prohibition also creates a black market that fuels gangs and drug cartels. Since December of 2006, over 800 policemen have been killed by these same cartels in Mexico. Recently, Arizona Attorney General Terry Goddard was quoted as saying the following in reference to marijuana legalization: "The most effective way to establish a virtual barrier against the criminal activities is to take the profit out of it." I've talked to you about the ways we lose money by prohibition. Now I'd like to talk to you about the money we're giving away by not taxing it. According to a study by economist Stephen Easton, the average cost of production for a half gram of marijuana is $1.70. The average price of it sold on the street was listed at $8.60. This is a $6.90 free market profit that is basically the tax given to gangs and cartels for producing and shipping the product. Consumers are willing to pay this risk premium for not being involved in the process of production. But Easton continues to say that if legalized, the street price could remain at the same amount, demand would increase, and the only difference would be the total elimination of marijuana drug cartels and a massive federal revenue gain. According to Dr. Jeffrey Miron, an economics professor at Harvard University, legalizing marijuana would save $7.7 billion a year on just enforcement costs. But that's not all. If further taxed, like tobacco and alcohol, it could generate as much as $6 billion additional each year. That is a net savings of $14 billion annually. Combine this with the savings that the government would have from no longer spending billions on anti-marijuana campaigns, and we're looking at a much larger number. Today we've talked about how the usage of marijuana has increased over the years, how a large amount of our police task force and subsequently our tax dollars are being utilized to enforce a plan that has never caused a death. We've talked about the money we're losing, the gangs we're funding, and the money that could easily be gained. Marijuana prohibition has failed, and our economy is at its weakest point since the Great Depression. Sometimes it takes a large disaster to bring people together. Perhaps the stage has been set for these old policies, which have been based on racism and politics instead of science and health, to finally change and perhaps help to bring us out of this disastrous economic slump. Thank you.
All right, the proposition has two multiple claims. The setup of the substructure was actually pretty clear. There's not much doubt about what the controversy is here. The transitions on your first point was a little bit vague. It seemed like you rushed into it. We're getting on the evidence right away. I thought that on the evidence you had good statistical information from the beginning, although some of the data on usage seems a little old. The information on the expert testimony on the economic advantages, I think, is pretty well cited. There's some factual data about laws and uses, and that's okay. I thought the attention device was pretty effective at setting up the point of view that you have. There are a couple of places where there's some broad generalizations being made here that you might want to be careful about. For instance, right at the end you make the link to the economy being in crap shape, and that's, the connection to marijuana legalization, I think, is a very thin one at that particular point. So I think you've got a stronger argument on talking about some of the other issues. Sometimes you're introducing secondary issues that might be relevant to a policy claim instead of focusing on the effect of the inference that you're making here. So for example, you get on the safety issue and you're talking about comparison to other legal drugs, that sort of thing. In a broader argument, those things would be relevant. In the narrower claim that you've got here, I think that they're probably not quite as relevant. All right, thank you.